Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation, The Coming Extinction of the Purpose-Built Backup Appliance. Just two quick announcements before we get started. First is that you are going to receive a copy of this presentation. You'll receive the slides via email to the email address that you provided when you registered. You'll be getting that within an hour after the presentation, and then you'll also be receiving a copy of this recording in about 24 hours. So we are recording this as well. Second is that there's a question tool in GoToWebinar. Please use that tool throughout the presentation to ask questions, and one lucky participant in the Q&A at the end is going to win a free Kindle. So definitely make sure to stick around for that. I hope everyone's enjoying the complimentary pizza. If there were any problems or questions, just use the question tool to let us know. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to today's speaker, Infrascale founder and CEO, Ken Shaw.
This is what the agenda for today looks like. First, we'll be looking at the challenges of today's backup systems. Then we'll look at the rise of this new architecture, this hybrid cloud backup architecture. And then we're going to look at 6 specific factors why that's better than the old client-server or appliance-based architecture, and why we believe at Infrascale that hybrid cloud is really going to kill off that traditional client-server or appliance-based model. Then we'll tell you a little bit about Infrascale, and lastly we'll do a free-form Q&A, and that's where we do the Kindle giveaway that Carla mentioned earlier. That'll be where the person who asks the most questions on topic will get that Kindle, and we'll be announcing the winner live. So stick around to the end, and you may be the happy owner of a brand new Kindle. So let's dive in. Just a very brief bit of information about Infrascale. I'll talk more about us at the end, but we've been around for almost a decade, founded in 2006. And if you look at the top left of this slide, you really get a sense of what we're trying to do as a company. We think of Salesforce as our spirit animal, which is a weird thing to say as a data protection company, but Salesforce came along and they transformed a software category that was incredibly complex. We're talking about ERP and CRM. It was all done on-prem, it was all client-server, and it was incredibly expensive. They transformed that into an easy-to-use application that you could consume via the web or the cloud, that you could get started on straight away, pay as you go, and have it all in one single pane of glass. And that's what we're doing with data protection. So we've got a cloud-based application platform that delivers complete data protection. We do cloud backup, disaster recovery, data archiving, and file sharing all through a single pane of glass. And that approach is proving to be quite popular. Today we're protecting over 20 billion different data objects. We have 1,000 partners in the United States of America. We're protecting 1 million devices, where a device is usually a physical server or a virtual server or sometimes laptops. And we run our own data grid out of 16 locations worldwide. Some of our customers include Lockheed Martin or the American Red Cross. But the thing that I'm most excited about on this slide is that Gartner just named us their cool vendor for 2015 in disaster recovery and business continuity. And we're going to learn about why that is in just a few minutes. Now, for those of you, I've seen a few comments here on the line. For those of you who haven't gotten your pizza, Carla will be in touch with you via the questions tool to organize any issues there to make sure you do get those. Now, before we go any further and before we sort of dig into the presentation, I want to ask the audience a question. So we use these polls just to sort of make sure that we're tailoring our content to the right size. So put your pizza down, reach forward, click a button, tell us how big your company is. We like to use this so we can tailor the content, make sure the examples we're using are correct, and it's just really useful for us to know. All right, so 48% of you have voted, 54% of you, 59%. And while you're all voting, again, for the couple of folks that didn't get their pizza, you can also email team@infrascale.com, and we'll make sure that if you didn't get it today, then we'll organize for you to get it tomorrow. All right, we're just shy of 70% of the audience voting. Let's just wait a few more seconds. All right. Well, so about 75% of you have voted. It's interesting. We've got a big U-curve in the numbers. 39% of you are in the 0 to 100 bucket, and then a few folks in the middle buckets, and then 36% of people in the 500 plus. So we've got quite a a distribution for today's webinar, which is interesting. All right, well, let's turn then to the challenges of today's backup systems. And for anybody who's in the industry, this section is you're going to be familiar with these concepts. Let's look at some numbers first and foremost. And the picture that these numbers paint really is that despite the high cost of downtime, most businesses are ill prepared for it, and they're living with a false sense of security. As an IT guy, I have often sort of been surprised at the the level of naivety that business managers have about the state of our disaster preparedness, right? So if you think about this, yeah, we all know that there are vulnerabilities in our systems and that we're not 100% protected, but a lot of business people just don't understand that. And some of these statistics highlight it. Gartner's got a statistic that says that 70% of IT and directors of IT or directors of operations are not confident with the statement, our backup and disaster recovery operations are well managed and planned. Symantec's got another statistic that's quite scary, that 60% of SMB data is actually not being protected, right? And yet the cost of downtime has never been higher. In fact, IDC says that the average cost of downtime for mid-market businesses in the United States is $20,000 per hour. And the Institute of Business and Home Safety estimates that 25% of businesses never reopen following a major disaster. And so given this many problems with data protection, one's got to ask, why is this? And one of the big reasons that this has occurred is the fragmentation of data over the last 20 years. If I can take you back to the 90s, and you think about what your data protection landscape looked like back then, it was pretty simple. So the left-hand side of this slide shows that. All of our data generally sat inside the data center, and we could build big walls around that. We could build ourselves a data castle, and that's where our CRM and our ERP was. Compute was our most expensive resource. And if we were taking account of endpoints in our data protection regime, we knew what they were running. They were running Windows, and they were generally corporate-owned devices, and they're usually coming in over a VPN anyway, so most of the important content was still within the four walls of the data center. Now let's fast forward to today, and that's the right-hand side of this diagram. And it's a completely fragmented mess. Within the data center, we've now got physical apps, we've now got virtual apps. Everyone in their CAD is spinning up a new virtual machine for test or for dev or for who knows what. You've got multiple hypervisors. You've now got a mismatch of operating systems. You've even got some apps and some workloads running out in public clouds. So what was once a relatively straightforward and easily contained picture has now become very messy. And out in user land, it's even gotten worse. No longer are these devices company-owned. Many devices in the workplace are owned by the employees, or BYOD. They're not always running Windows anymore. Lots of them are running Mac, or because of tablets and iPhones, there's a lot of Android and iOS in user land. And the file server is pretty much dead. People aren't VPNing anymore. People are using Dropbox and bring your own cloud. So this sort of red mess on the right-hand side of this screen represents massive complexity when it comes to data protection. And complexity leads to coverage gaps, and coverage gaps create risk for your business and for your job individually. And so then this sort of industry megatrend is further worsened by the behavior of vendors like me. So in this slide, I'm sort of dishing on, the backup industry that I belong to, but vendors are actually making your life a lot worse. And so what vendors generally do is they offer customers a sucker's choice. When I first pitched my marketing team on this, they didn't know what I was talking about when I said sucker's choice, so maybe it's an Australian term, but a sucker's choice is a choice between two alternatives with the false premise that they are the only two options available. So with hybrid cloud backup, the idea is that there could be a third choice. Imagine you walk into a restaurant and you order a steak, and then the waitress asks you, would you like your steak cold or would you like your fries to be cold? Well, of course, that's an idiotic question. I want them both to be hot. But that's exactly what backup vendors are doing to you, to the end user. They're trying to shoehorn you into their architecture. And the two major paradigms going on are the client-server architecture or the appliance-based architecture, and then a new direct-to-cloud-based architecture. Now, the issue here is that both of these architectures have pros and cons, right? Cloud-based backup has some wonderful things going for it. It's immediately up and running. It's got unlimited storage capacity. It's redundant and resilient. It's omnipresent, so that every device can always connect to the cloud. But it's got its drawbacks, right? So data upload time is slow. Recovery time is slow. The data leaves your network, so you don't have data sovereignty. You've then got to rely on the security practices of the vendor. And so it's not perfect. And if we look at appliance-based backup or client-server-based backup, it's got its pros and cons. So on the positive side, it can support really large data sets. You've got data sovereignty and control because the data's right there. You've got quick recovery because you're backing up and recovering at gigabit land speed. But it's got many problems too. Capacity planning is an absolute nightmare. You're always going to get that equation wrong, right? You either over-provision or you under-provision. It's extremely expensive. Your on-prem primary storage costs you $3 or $4 per gigabyte, whereas cloud storage now costs, 20% of that. It's fragile. Hardware is inherently fragile. As Jason Buffington over at ESG says, bad things happen on-prem. And he's right, bad things do happen on-prem. Management of all this infrastructure is a pain. You've got to do system updates. So neither of these paradigms or these architectures are ideal. Wouldn't it be wonderful if there was a third way, a way that could triangulate the benefits of both of those architectures? And that's exactly what hybrid cloud backup is. So if we sort of, in sticking with our Jurassic World theme, if we think about the evolution of backup, in the 80s, tape was it. That's all we had. And frankly, tape, there's still a lot of tape out there alive today. In the 90s, we had the emergence of disk-based on-prem backup. And it had a lot of benefits, but it was expensive. Then, in the 2000s, cloud backup emerged. But again, cloud backup had its own issues too, particularly that it was slow. So what we're now talking about here in 2015 is hybrid cloud backup, which combines the best concepts of disk-based backup and cloud-based backup to give you a solution that's reliable, affordable, and fast. And so this is how it works. On the left here on this slide, you've got your applications and your data, maybe an Exchange server or a SQL server. Those are backing up to a hybrid cloud appliance there in the middle of the screen, the little red box, and that's protected at land speed, right? Then it's trickle feeding off to the cloud, and you're also doing all of your management and control in the cloud as well. So this is the architecture. And let's look now at 6 specific reasons why this architecture is so superior to the traditional client-server or appliance-based architecture. The first one is that the client-server model or the appliance model is simply an expensive hardware trap. Why? Firstly, it stores all of the data on local hardware, enterprise disk, regardless of the age or value of data. And this is crazy, right? Particularly when we know that only 10% of data is actually ever recovered from, on average, right? 90% of data is never actually recovered from. So why are we keeping that on an expensive enterprise disk? Secondly, we've always got to over-provision appliance capacity to accommodate for the data growth. Thirdly, if you want to then have a DR scenario, you've got to go and buy a whole second appliance to put in a second location to store the replicated data. Once all the capacity fills up, you've then got to buy some more local hardware for both the primary and the secondary location. And as I mentioned earlier, what's crazy about this is that cloud storage is now about 80% less expensive than enterprise disk. And so there's got to be a better way, and there is. It's hybrid cloud backup. No great surprise. The old way on the left-hand side of this diagram is what I call the hardware hamster wheel. You got your data, you're backing it up to an appliance, the appliance fills up, so you do a capacity planning exercise, you buy more hardware, you deploy it, you fill it up, so you go through it all over and over again, so that more space always equals more appliance. The traditional vendors really just want to sell you another big box of disks. In the new world, you have your last backup appliance. It's right there in the middle of the screen. And what that appliance does is intelligently moves workloads out to the cloud and back again as necessary. So the equation here is that more space equals more cloud, right? And so that you just need to put in one box, and that box can take any amount of data. That takes me to the next topic of cloud spillover. So imagine a 4 terabyte backup appliance that you could send 400 terabytes of data to. Now, that's not possible with compression or deduplication, although we have both of those technologies and they're very powerful. It's only possible with our cloud spillover technology. which is intelligent policy-based software that understands that statistic we said before, that 90% of data is never accessed again. Our devices understand that not all data requires expensive local capacity. It can spill over data to the cloud based on the age or the value of that data, and it will automatically detect the different types of data in your set and make intelligent decisions about them. You can also set up your own policy, so if you don't like what the device has done by default, then you can modify it. Now, this eliminates the need for local appliance capacity as you grow. You put in one device and it brings the entire power of the cloud into your infrastructure. And so then also built into that is no need for a second appliance in a second location. You've got disaster recovery by default. So it takes away the need to manage ever-growing infrastructure. It takes away the need to actually do a capacity planning exercise, and it takes away the need to have a device in a second location. And when I say the cloud, a lot of people ask me, well, what do you mean by that? Do you run your own cloud? And the answer to that is yes, we do, but we're cloud agnostic. So our mantra is that we support your cloud, our cloud, or any cloud. When we say your cloud, we're talking about your private cloud infrastructure. So if you've got multiple sites, we'll just help you set this up within your own network. If you're using a third-party cloud like Amazon or Azure, that's fine. Our software can run it on top of both of those infrastructures. When we're talking about our cloud, we do in fact run a global network of data centers. So if you want a completely turnkey service, then we can provide that for you. But lastly, if you're running a VMware or Hyper-V or OpenStack environment, we can also help you run our solution there. So true cloud flexibility. And this, again, is important. A lot of backup vendors are doing you a huge disservice by locking you into one particular cloud, right? And vendor lock-in's a huge problem in the data protection industry. But we don't lock you into one particular cloud, and you should absolutely have choice of your cloud. I can see lots of questions coming on the line, which is great. We're going to answer those questions at the end, guys, so I'm going to get to every single one of those. And remember, there's that Kindle for the person who asked the most, so feel free to just ask them, and I'm going to get to them soon. Now, the second reason why hybrid cloud backup is, we think, going to eat the market for traditional client-server or appliance-based devices is disaster recovery. In the traditional approach, the hardware sort of centric approach, the way you did DR is depicted on the left-hand side of this slide. So you got your production infrastructure. Let's say that's a $50,000 SQL cluster. Then, if you want a full-on DR scenario, you need to go to a second location, buy a second set of hardware, so now you've doubled your cost. But it's not just as simple as that. A lot of people think that setting up full-on DR means doubling your cost. But then you need the bandwidth, the people, and the software to make replication and failover between these two locations actually work. So you're actually looking at up to 2.5 times the hardware cost for setting up a DR scenario. What if there was a better way? So what if there was a way that with a single click I could bring back all of my infrastructure in the case of there being a fire or the case of a power surge, or what's far more common, the case of a micro disaster. You know, the motherboard fails on my ESX host. And so that's exactly what we've built with our Cloud Boot technology. Cloud Boot is on-demand disaster recovery, on-demand failover of your infrastructure. It allows you to recover your servers, applications, and data in minutes. Incredibly short recovery time objective, easy enough for a fourth grader. Let me show you the workflow. Oh, actually, before we go into that, we've got our second poll. So then this question is about how would you describe yourself when it comes to disaster recovery? So we've got 3 options here. Which of these 3 is you? I can fail over to a second site in under 60 minutes already. I wish I had failover DR, but I can't afford it. Or I don't think I need failover DR. All right, I've got about 20% of you have voted. About half of you have voted. All right, interesting results so far. Keep voting, folks. We want to get it up to about 70%. But so far the results are about half of you can fail over to a second site in under 60 minutes. That's very good. 42% of you wish you had failover DR, but you can't afford it. And 6% of you don't think you need failover DR. Oh, and then John sent me a comment. John says he can fail over in 24 hours. Good. Okay, John. Yeah, we should add that as a fourth option. Okay, we've got about 66% of people voted. Come on, folks. Put down your pizza, wipe your greasy hands, reach forward, click a button. We'll give it a few more seconds here. Now, look, for those of you who didn't get your pizza, and I've seen a couple of comments on the questions tool, please email us at team@infrascale.com. Sometimes Domino's messes things up, but we'll make sure that you get it tomorrow if you didn't get it today, or even later today if you want that. So email us at team@infrascale.com. We'll sort that out. All right, we've got about, okay, 70% of people have voted. 53% of you say that you can fail over to a second site in under 60 minutes, which is very good. 41% say that you wish you had failover DR, but you can't afford it. And 7% of you don't think you need failover DR. Well, I hope that I can change your mind about whether or not you need it in the next few minutes. So let me show you how this works with Infrascale. So here's a happy computing environment, right? We've got our end users at the top left. They've connected to their apps. Let's say it's an Exchange server and they're using Outlook. And all of a sudden, power surge fries the network. So the servers and the applications are down. The users can't do any work. They can't access their email. What do? This is normally a nightmare scenario for an IT guy, right? If you've only got a backup solution in place, what you're looking at here is having to get new infrastructure, doing a recovery, which can take 24 hours, maybe virtualizing it. Maybe you don't have enough hardware, so maybe you have to, buy some hardware in an emergency scenario. And this can take days. And if you've got data sitting out in tapes in other locations, or if it's just sitting out in the cloud, this might take you weeks. This is a scary situation to be in. With Infrascale, you just click a button. So you go into the cloud dashboard, you find the server that was down, you click boot. And then what Infrascale is going to do is virtualize that on the fly, whether it's a physical server or a virtual server, it doesn't matter. Boot that up either on the local appliance or in the cloud, depending on the choice that you make. And then your users can reconnect to that infrastructure and keep working. Now, when I went through that yesterday, people said to me, Ken, why didn't you do a demo? And so today, we're going to do a little demo. And so here I've got a video. It's actually embedded in the slide of our dashboard. So what you can see on screen here is that single pane of glass that I was talking about earlier. And this is where you manage all of your Infrascale infrastructure. And it's a very powerful system. It actually lets you do things like geolocation of devices and wipe my device. And as you can see here in the middle of the screen, it gives you a sort of a stoplight management system for all of your alerts. So it really makes managing a diverse data protection environment incredibly simple. But what we're going to focus on here is the cloud boot use case. So we're going to go through to our appliances page, and what you'll notice here is a whole series of sort of appliances on the left, and these represent offices, right? So one appliance per office. And you'll see that the appliances are then replicating to targets on the right-hand side of the screen. Right, so this appliance here that I'm mousing over, it's replicating to the cloud on the right-hand side. Some of these aren't replicating. And so what this console actually lets me do is to drill into and manage remotely these appliances right from my cloud-based dashboard. I could do this from my iPad. So I never need to worry about mucking around with a VPN or logging in anymore. I can just do it all via the cloud. So here I've logged into the appliance and I can see all the various jobs that have been done in this particular office. And I'm going to go to the Cloud Boot tab at the top. And what the Cloud Boot tab does is shows me all of the source servers that we're actually protecting. So I can right-click and boot. I then get a simple wizard, click through. I'm going to select the date at which that I want to bring this server back to life. So let's pick the 17th. I'm now going to configure the firewall so I can limit where IP traffic is going to come from or what ports and services I want to be made available. For this demo, I'm just going to allow RDP traffic. Then I put in an email address to notify me of when this cloud boot is complete. Click Finish. And if I then navigate over to the Active tab, this shows me all the running cloud boot instances. So I can see here that that server that is dead and that I've brought back to life is running. It's got an IP address. So I'm going to bring over my Windows Remote Desktop client and connect to that. And it's then going to ask me for the Windows username and password of that server that I brought back to life. Accept the certificate. And boom, just like that, I've now connected to that server that was dead. That server blew up right? That Power Surge killed it. But here I have it running in the cloud in minutes after that failure. And let's go and ping Google just to make sure that it's actually online and accessible and running. Perfect. So you just saw me do end-to-end a recovery scenario from a disaster where I've completed this diagram. The whole thing takes about 3 or 4 minutes. End users lost connection. We then recovered and virtualized those servers, started running them in the cloud, and reconnected them, right? Pretty powerful stuff. So let's move on to reason 3 why we think that the hybrid cloud architecture is going to kill off the traditional client-server model. And it's really about coverage, right? The traditional approach forces you to pick which one of your children do you want to save. It's only really good for tethered devices like physical servers or virtual servers. Desktops as well, but for roaming laptops, it's absolutely horrible. For mobile devices, it's horrible. For multi-site, multi-location environments, it's horrible. Go out and Google backup exec multiple branch offices, and you get like a 20-page document that walks you through how to configure that. The benefit of hybrid cloud is that it's connected to everything, right? It's omnipresent, as I said earlier. So it means that all of your devices are connected to the cloud and can be protected at any given point in time. And when I say all of your devices, I really mean all of your devices. So InfraScale's got agents or modules and support for mobile devices, desktops and laptops, as well as physical and virtual servers. You see all that across the top. We call this the dartboard because with any of those form factors, if you want to do cloud backup, disaster recovery, or data archiving, or file sharing, you can throw a dart at this diagram, and wherever it lands, we support it. And we don't just support the big operating systems, right? Yes, we support VMware and Windows, but we support all the major variants of Linux and Unix, even some more esoteric operating systems like novel NetWare. Down into user land, we support Windows for desktops and laptops, as well as Mac OS X, and then even iPhone and Android. And so that is a good segue into the completeness of data protection. The truth is that traditional appliances just aren't complete. You need to buy and build a lot of other stuff around them to make them work. A really common example is that your traditional backup appliance doesn't give you disaster recovery. You've got to buy a second one. Or your traditional backup appliance really is no good at working over the WAN. You've got to put a WAN acceleration in front of it. And so in this age of hyper-converged infrastructure, what InfraScale's tried to do is converge all of these technologies into a single solution. I was at a conference a few years ago and a partner asked me, Ken, why can't we just have a magic backup box that does it all? And we laughed and we thought it was a joke. But it's actually not a joke. And that phrase, magic backup box, has become a bit of a catch cry within InfraScale now, where we actually ask ourselves, if there was such a thing as a magic backup box, what would it do? And this is what we've come up with. We've built a hyper-converged data protection solution that combines all the features of an integrated storage box, so storage, compute, network, and local enterprise software that works within your LAN. We've combined that with all the power of direct-to-cloud, so the unlimited, instantly available, resilient storage, its omnipresent network control, its centralized management, its ability to do things like geo-detection and remote wipe. We've then added in the technology found in WAN accelerators, so you don't need to buy a Riverbed or a Silver Peak. We've built that inline block-level deduplication and over-the-wire block-level deduplication into the device itself. And then we've taken the same concept as cloud spillover pioneered by the cloud storage gateways like the Citeras and put that into our devices as well. So it's a hyper-converged data protection appliance. And we then make all of that really simple to manage by giving you that single pane of glass, that cloud-based dashboard that I showed you earlier that gives you all of that power and all of that functionality at the click of a button. And you can access it from anything with an internet connection. So whoever wins today's Kindle, you could actually control your entire data protection environment from the Kindle. And then let's move to the fifth reason why client-server architectures are facing enormous challenges today. Right now, the hottest topic in enterprise IT is information security, right? We've all heard about the recent breach at OPM. We've all heard about the attacks at Sony and breaches in major corporate American corporations over the last 2 years. One of the things that few people know about the Sony attack is, well, two things actually. Firstly, the hackers didn't just share the data that they stole, they destroyed that data. So they actually wiped Sony's network, and Sony lost enormous amounts of data. And so cyber attacks and cyber breaches actually, one of the big causes of damage that they do is the loss of data. But the second big thing is this: your backup solutions are often prime, juicy targets for hackers. It's where all of your data gets aggregated into a single place, and they're never hardened systems. None of the traditional backup vendors take security seriously, and so your backup infrastructure is this huge, juicy target, and you should talk to whoever's in charge of information security at your company and ask him, what are we doing to secure and encrypt our backup data? Well, at Infrascale, because we were cloud first, we built encryption in from the ground up. And so if you fast forward to today, we are HIPAA compliant, CJIS compliant, we're used by law enforcement all over North America, Sarbanes-Oxley compliant, PCI compliant. And we do this by using a type of encryption that was developed in the US military. It's called double-blind encryption. And the basic concept's really simple. Before data leaves your network, it gets encrypted with a key that only you have. Then it gets sent over the wire to us, and we encrypt it again with a key that only we have. And it means that Infrascale and you, the customer, have to cooperate to get that data back, a little bit like a safety deposit box at a bank. Now, this is completely different to most cloud storage models or most traditional backup appliances, where the data goes through an SSL tunnel as an encrypted once with a shared key that lots and lots of people have. It's incredibly insecure. So one of the big takeaways from this webinar for you is go and talk to who's in charge of your information security and say, look, have we thought about the risk associated with our backup systems from a cyber defense perspective? And then I want to turn to the sixth and last reason why hybrid cloud devices are going to kill off the purpose-built appliances in the client-server architecture. And frankly, it's just price. The price performance level that you get out of these new types of devices is incredible. So here on screen we've compared Infrascale to 4 other well-known client-server appliance vendors. We took a 10 terabyte appliance with 3 years of cloud, and Barracuda came in at 90,000, Unitrends at 70,000, Infrascale at just 26,000, so up to 70% less expensive. How can we do that? Well, we're built with modern technology. We're not built on technology that was written in the 80s. And we use the cloud to deliver all this power at a fraction of the cost that it would cost you using traditional methods. All right, so that brings us to the end of the presentation. Just a little bit more about Infrascale, and then we'll turn to the Q&A. So as we said before, it's a single cloud-based application that gives you cloud backup, disaster recovery on demand, data archiving, and file sharing. Our mission at Infrascale is to help keep business data safe and available. It's not enough to just keep data safe. You need to be able to bring it back and have it running when you need it. We believe that all companies should be able to have automated disaster recovery and failover in their environments. And frankly, we don't think anybody should have to face that cold sweat that comes with knowing you've lost all your data, or that absolute gut-wrenching fear of knowing your systems are down but you do not know when they're going to come back up. We've all been there, and I can say for one, I never ever want to face that again. And so that's what we're doing here at Infrascale. We talked about our customers earlier. The Gartner 2015 Cool Vendor Award, we're very happy about that. They gave us that because of all the work we're doing in hybrid cloud and in disaster recovery as a service, that failover and on demand. You know, and some other people have got some good things to say about us as well. So Storage Switzerland says that Infrascale's changing the on-site sizing paradigm, freeing up organizations from having to continually add capacity to existing appliances or to have to upgrade to newer and bigger appliances. ZDNet says that Infrascale is looking to change the dynamics of hybrid storage, taking the one-size-does-fit-all approach on the appliance side. We're obviously talking about our cloud spillover technology there. But that brings us to the end of the webinar. So at this point, I've got a few requests. First thing is, get an evaluation unit. Play with this technology yourself. Bring it in-house and actually see what on-demand DR can do for your business. Secondly, I'd love you to drop me a line if you want to give me any feedback on the webinar. It's ken@infrascale.com. And then now we're going to turn to all the questions that are on the line. And just before we do that, I'll launch our last poll. if folks can answer that last question, which is, how are you currently thinking about backup and disaster recovery? Are you maybe A, not happy with your current backup system? B, you're happy with your backup system but interested in failover DR or DRAS? C, deploying new equipment and looking to modernize your protection infrastructure around that? Or D, happy with your system, just learning? And while you're all answering that, I'm going to turn to the Q&A, and we've got a whole ton of questions here on the line. So bear with me while I just scroll back to the top of this list. Okay, so David asks, does your solution include deduplication prior to backup? David, absolutely. So when we bought Eversync a couple of years ago, one of the big reasons we bought them was for their patented deduplication system. So we have a deduplicating file system called DDFS that actually gets close to a 95% dehydration rate by doing block level deduplication, both inline and over the wire. So not only are we doing dedupe in your local network, but we're also doing dedupe over the WAN, which is really high-end technology that you would normally only get in something like a data domain. All right. Next question is from David. Again, what's the best practice in general to test backup recovery other than rebuilding a duplicate infrastructure? Well, David, you saw me do a DR test before, right? So with InfraScale's DRAS solution, or DR on demand, it's so simple to verify that you can bring back your environment. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you, but whenever I've had to manage, backup infrastructure earlier in my career, I never knew if it was going to work. The beauty of Cloud Boot is you can just go in there, find the server you want to test with, and then bring it back to life, see if it works, right? That's incredibly powerful because you've got the peace of mind of knowing that you can actually recover in a disaster scenario. Another question from David. Does your solution have an agent that could crawl the endpoint in search of certain data, e.g. collect Word docs? We do, David. There's two ways of running our system for endpoints. One is the smart scanner, which does exactly what you said. You can set up rules and tell it what to search for, and it will do auto discovery of data. Or you can do a manual selection, traditional kind of select the data. Most people just use the scanner, though. All right, next question from Chu. Are there any known complications on having a hybrid and an on-prem backup at the same time? Chu, interesting question. Look, your hybrid appliance still has an on-prem copy, so that's the whole thing with hybrid, right, is it is on-prem as well as in the cloud. So I think what you mean is there anything wrong with having InfraScale sit next to Barracuda? And no, there's nothing wrong with that. And then Chris says, is the backup image-based? Chris, it can either be file-based or image-based at your election. Either way, we're doing block-level deduplication, so it doesn't make a ton of difference, to be honest, right? Because the reason a lot of people will not do image-based is they're worried about storage and efficiency. Well, with our DDFS technology, you don't have to worry about that. Okay, Chu asks, what are the costs and space packages? Chu, it's really horses for courses, mate. We've got some solutions that start at a couple $100 a month, and we have solutions that cost several $100,000. So it's really going to depend on your environment, as with any enterprise data protection system. Mike writes, how do you eliminate the tapes if archiving is required? Mike, we've got a cloud-based archiving solution that is at the same price point as tape-based technology, but still gives you real-time access. So the archiving is just built into our solution, and we think it's time that businesses got off tape and moved to the cloud because you've got real-time access and you don't need to worry about storing all that physical media. Al says, are there favorable margins for offering InfraScale as a reseller? Al, there absolutely are, and I really recommend that you talk to one of our partner specialists about that. We've got 1,000 partners. We've got a very rich partner program, all sorts of training and marketing resources. We do field events with you. It's so we only sell through the channel. We only sell through our partners. So for those of you who are partners on the line, get in touch with us. And for those of you who are end users on the line, still get in touch with us. We'll introduce you to a local InfraScale partner. So that's no big deal. You still talk to us and get your eval through us. All right, Chris asks, can you delete by policy specific data? Sample, I may need to delete a folder at the request of the court. That means I have to delete the live data and any data in the backup sets. Can this do that no matter how far back I need to go? Chris, yeah, it'll go back through your backup and archive system and delete the data that you want in that scenario. It will not delete off production, though. That's just a note. Okay, Joshua asks, are you HIPAA and high-tech compliant? Joshua, we are. Actually, yeah, I think you asked that before I got to that slide. Chu says, do you guys back up virtual environments? Absolutely, Chu. That's probably one of the most common use cases that people are using Infoscale for. Sean says, how do you facilitate the tiering within our environment without opening a path for someone to exploit? Sean, I'm not sure I get that, mate. Can you maybe re-ask the question in a different way, or maybe give me a bit more detail? Anise writes, what happens to our data if the account is cancelled or expired? Anise, we hold onto the data for 90 days after cancellation, and then we do a secure purge. So you've got 90 days to change your mind, and then it's truly gone. Okay, David writes, how is the cloud data secured, encrypted, and separated from other customers' data? So David, I think we covered this. It's all separated, and then that's with that double-blind security approach, which was topic 5 from the video, and on that you can have a look at that slide. You'll get it in an hour. Okay, Sean writes, how is the data transmission and at-rest maintained throughout the process? So Sean, I think you're talking about the encryption. Again, that's that AES 256 bits of encryption that we use with the key that only you have first. And then secondly, it's then re-encrypted again with a key that only we have. Al says, replicating backups to multiple locations is very important. It is, Al, and that's inherent in everything we do. You can either replicate to another appliance or replicate to the cloud, and you saw how easy that was when I played the video earlier. Okay, so Chris writes, what happens to my data if I no longer want to host the data off-site? Is it in a format that has to be converted in some way? Chris, you just pull it back, so it's not a big deal. Yeah, you just pull the data back to your appliance and then copy it off. Sean writes, is the environment yours or hosted on someone? Sean, so like I said, when I talk about your cloud, our cloud, any cloud, we can support all of the above. So we do have some of our own facilities, and then you can use any data center you like or any third-party cloud. Anise writes, how many people have access to our data centers where our data would be stored? Anise, only 2 or 3 people have access to those data centers, but again, it really doesn't matter if you've got access to the physical servers. All the data stored on those servers is stored in 2 separate encryption bubbles. It's completely indecipherable. You know, if we get subpoenaed, for example, and asked to turn over people's data, we simply cannot comply. Craig writes, next time, allow toppings choice. Okay, that's about the pizza, Craig. Good tip. David writes, what's the delay/latency between the hybrid on-premise appliance and the cloud copy? David, that's totally going to depend on your internet connection. We're connected with multiple gigabit paths to the internet, so it's really going to be about the connection you have on your end. Okay, Dennis writes, depending on the choice you make, he's quoting me, does that mean you can do both some in the cloud and some on-prem, and it's just slower to access some of them? Dennis, that's exactly right. Yeah, you can choose if you want it in the cloud or on-prem, or whatever combination of those you would like. John writes, can you protect IBM iSeries, System I, etc.? John, we support AIX 5, 6, and 7 in terms of IBM. Dennis writes, is the data and appliance info available via API? Yes, it is. John writes, how do you restore an entire data center failure? Well, John, you'd go in, you'd select the servers that are dead, you'd click Cloud Boot, it's going to run all those jobs in parallel. So you saw me do it for 1. I could have just clicked on, 4, 5, 10, 50 at a time, or I could have just literally clicked Select All. It's that simple. And it'll work for up to 200 parallel recoveries. So if you've got more than 200 servers, then we would want to put two or 3 instances in place. Okay, where's the next question? Okay, Mike writes, what if the whole site is down? How powerful is your appliance to stand up multiple VMs? Mike, you can run like 10 to 15 VMs on that appliance. If the entire site is down, the appliance will usually be down 2, and so then you're going to run the cloud. And as I was saying before, the cloud will let you run up to 200 VMs per instance. So if you've got a bigger environment than that, we just scale out horizontally. So it's incredibly scalable. Joshua writes, when you say you have the ability to wipe data remotely, does this mean you could also be an MDM solution, mobile device management? Joshua, yeah, a simple MDM. So for monitoring, geolocation, remote wipe, that's what we do. MDM sometimes includes other functionality too. Craig writes, can we keep using our current hardware, or is there additional hardware we need to integrate? Craig, you can use our software with your hardware, or we can sell you an integrated appliance. John says, when you spin up a protected server in the cloud, is there a maximum allowed time frame that the server can be running before charges are incurred? John, for a test, it's 48 hours. For an actual disaster, I think it's a month. I'll need to check on that, John. But in general, you can do, it's all built into the pricing, so you don't really need to worry about that. Sean says, are the appliance based on data size config within a firewall and pass through to your environment? Sean, it's based on data size, yes. But if you remember that cloud spillover technology that I talked about earlier, what that enables is you to send any amount of data to these devices, regardless of their internal capacity. John says, are the charges associated with declaring a disaster? John, one disaster per year is built in to your price plans. Chris says, how long can you have it running in the cloud during a disaster scenario? Chris, like I was just saying, 30 days before a modest charge is incurred. Anise says, do you support backing up Windows Server 2003? Yes, we do. Sean says, are you positioned more as an archive or true backup and restore environment? Sean, we're mainly a disaster recovery and backup solution, and then we've got some archiving functionality built in as well. Joshua says, do you run your own data centers? If so, what certifications do they have? We mainly outsource, Joshua, so our main data center partner is IBM, and they're all ISO certified, SAS 70 Type 2 certified. They're some of the most beautiful data centers in the world that I've ever seen. And so, but then we also work with third-party clouds as well. Okay. Mike writes, for backing up a physical server and the server dies, does the appliance pretend to be the server that went down until you repair? Mike, that is yes, you could put it that way. That's exactly how it that's exactly what it's trying to do. Chris says, is your data storage model unlimited to accommodate backing up all devices? It's not unlimited, Chris, but it is designed to accommodate all devices, yeah. David writes, can the online VM version of the backup be accessed anytime and managed by the data owner, or is that part of a service you provide? I'm confused by the question. Yes, it is available anytime, and yes, it can be accessed by the data owner. And yes, it is part of the service we provide. Al says, using data protection, will Infoscale support against ransomware and malware? Al, it will, because if we can give you your data back, then you don't need to pay for the ransomware. We've had tons of customers who got hit by crypto virus, and we saved them. Mike writes, is this service cost effective for small organizations for 50 users or less? It is, Mike, for sure. So we've got options that start at just a couple $100 a month. John says, we're currently an eVault customer. Can you speak to the major differences between the two services? Well, eVault doesn't really have a particularly strong cloud boot option, John. They have a manual failover option, but not an automated failover option like you saw with us. They're also quite expensive. So that's the limit of the knowledge off the top of my head, but here's what I will do. I'll get an account manager who is more knowledgeable than me to get in touch with you and discuss that. Mike writes, we have 3 file servers and about 15 terabytes of storage on each. How do you manage backing it up and DR for it? Mike, that's really simple. That's not much data by our standards, so we would install our appliance, either virtual or physical, in your network, back up those devices to that appliance, replicate you off to the cloud, and then DR is built in. Okay, Joshua says, the line item that says WAN acceleration, does that also cover deduplication? Joshua, it does. John says, do you have a ballpark cost per terabyte and or device? What's the pricing model? So John, I did have that one pricing example before, around $25,000 with the 3 years of DR in the cloud and a 10 terabyte on-prem appliance. But what's best is if I ask one of the account managers to get in touch with you and they can just give you our pricing sheets. John, are you a partner by any chance, or are you an end user? And maybe you can just type in a few details about your environment. Chris White, how many servers can you spin up in the event of a disaster? Up to 200 with a single instance, Chris. Do you offer trials? Yeah, so look, I really encourage everybody who wants an evaluation unit to type in now. So if you want to play with this technology in your environment, just type in, I'd like an evaluation unit. name, phone number, email address, and we'll scrape through this list and we'll organize that for you. So it's completely free, no obligation, but sometimes there's just nothing like playing with technology in your own environment to see how it works. So just type that into the questions tool and we'll get to it later today. Lots more questions here. Let me I'm gonna have to pick up the pace. Okay, let me see here. Okay, is there a cost associated with the cloud boot option? Andre, it's built into your contract. Harold says, what would be your greatest selling point to the business, non-IT, concerning this hybrid technology, particularly those in a heavily regulated environment and already have negative views toward clouding? Harold, don't call it cloud, or call it private cloud if you like. Do the replicated pairs, but it's on-demand disaster recovery, the ability to bring your business back up and running in minutes instead of days. And you don't have to send it out to a third-party cloud. The cloud can simply be your second location. How do you compare to Axient? More support of source and operating systems and devices, faster failover and disaster recovery, substantially less expensive, first-class support for VMware, whereas they don't really recognize VMware. Gregory writes, I like this by my company policy is to store backups indefinitely on tape. So can your system integrate with a tape system to allow us to export the backup to tape? It can, Gregory. So so long as you've got an LTFS compliant tape library, then we can export archive data off the tape. Al says, HIPAA is very important in today's marketplace. What agreements are signed by the clients in regard to protecting their data? So there's what's called a business association agreement, which is typical when you're doing sort of HIPAA work, and we'll sign those BAAs with either partners or with customers. Okay, Sean says, is your primary control based on the key exchange or IP address definitions or a combination of the two? Combination of the two. David writes, what's the benefit of having you double encrypt our data? It seems like you could then hold it hostage. I guess that's true, David. That's a cynical way of looking at things. You're right. We could theoretically hold it hostage, but we're in the business of getting businesses back online after a disaster. We're not in the business of withholding people's data. Anise writes, how do your backup speeds compare to other vendors in your field? There's actually been some studies on this by the New York Times and by PC Magazine, and we are by far the fastest of the major solutions. John says, is there any networking, throttling, or bandwidth control for replication? There is. There's quite a sophisticated policy engine that you can use to set up your own custom replication rules. Mike says, when the data replicates to the cloud, are those data centers always going to be located in the US? No, Mike, we've got a global grid and you can pick which countries you want the data to stay in. All right, we've got a lot more questions on the line. I'm going to have to, we've only got a few minutes left here. Okay, so Derek says, are you charged for time while the DR is spun up? I think we've covered that, Derek. It's built into your contract. Can the appliance software be run on our own hardware rather than purchase Infrascale's hardware? Yes, it can, Andre. What's the largest environment you will work in? I currently have about 200 petabytes of data to back up. Mike, our largest customers are backing up multiple petabytes, so 200 terabytes is not a problem. Next question, Chris says, can you spin up desktops that are included in the backup set? We can, but that's an expensive way to go, so we don't usually recommend that. Okay. John writes, what are the different models of the on-site appliance and capacity? John, I'll get an account manager to reach out to you because there are just too many for me to list here and I'm running out of time. Chris says, how long of a rolling history do you typically keep? We keep an unlimited history by default, but you can change that rule. Where are your data centers located? 6 in the United States and then 6 outside of the United States, and you can choose where your data goes. Okay, so sorry, Don writes, how many data centers in the USA? Just answered that, 6. Sean says, how are you addressing multi-tenancy protection, protecting against one of the 3-letter agencies requesting David's data and getting all of ours? Well, Sean, we've completely encapsulated data. So although it's a multi-tenant system, your data is isolated from other people's data, so you don't need to worry about how do end users access virtualized servers? Just through their applications. So end users actually don't, this is a transparent change to end users. Okay, all right, well look, we're actually out of time, folks, so here's what we're going to do. There are heaps of more questions on the line, and I apologize that we can't get to all these. What we're going to do is we're going to send an email to all of you whose questions I didn't get to, and so we'll follow up with that. Any of you who are interested in an evaluation unit, please right now write in, I'd like an evaluation unit, name, phone number, email address, and we'll organize that. If you got any feedback from me or any suggestions, I'd love to hear from you, can@infrascale.com. If we didn't get to reading your question out aloud now, we will we'll be following up with you via email, although I can see Carla's actually answering a bunch of questions right here via the questions tool, which is great. And so the okay, we have one question here. How many fourth graders have tested the disaster recovery model? That's a very funny question. But all right, so look, thanks everybody for your time today. I hope you've found it to be an informative presentation. Again, if you'd like an eval unit, type that into the questions tool. Carla will stay on the line here for a few extra minutes and answer questions on the system. We'll also be emailing you answers to the questions. Now, Carla, have you been keeping a running tally on who won that Kindle?
Yep, we've been doing that here. So are we ready for the giveaway now?
We are ready for the giveaway.
Okay, so I apologize in advance if I butcher this last name, but the winner of the Kindle is John Pasqualicho. Again, I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that last name right, but John, you're going to be the winner of today's Kindle. Congratulations, and thanks for asking all the questions and the engagement that you provided today.
Fantastic. Alrighty, folks. Well, so look, thanks for your time. Love any feedback you want to give us again. Request that eval. The system will keep running here for 5 or so minutes. Carla will be answering some questions, and then if we don't get to them, we'll email you. Thanks for your time, and hopefully you'll join us at another webinar in the future.